Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends and colleagues, depending on whichever time zones you are in. Welcome to to the session of today. I'm your moderator, Bilkis Tahira from Shirakat Partnership for Development, Pakistan. For me, it's an honor to welcome you to this exciting session. The devil is in the detail and in the shadows. The session explores two different illustrations of how tax policies and financial secrecy within corporate vehicles aggravate economic and social rights failings. Our distinguished presenters today are Leila Latif, who is a lecturer at University of Nairobi and PhD researcher, University of Cardiff. Our next speaker is Jason Ward, who has pre-recorded his session because he's based in Sydney, Australia, and there's a huge time difference. And then our last speaker is Veronica Serafini Gagan, who's a feminist economist. This session flows from a case study to policy advocacy, alliance building and networking, to suggestions on policy reform. Before I hand over to Leila, I invite and urge the participants to use the live discussion button in the bottom right of your screen if you would like to ask any questions to the speakers. And we will turn to Q&A in the latter half of the session. Introducing Leila Latif. Leila Latif is a finance, corporate, and human rights lawyer based in Kenya. She lectures at the University of Nairobi School of Law and is currently working on her doctorate at Cardiff Law and Politics. Her research focuses on the interplay between law, finance, and development. Leila, we are honored to have you here. The floor is yours now. You have 7 minutes.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone who's watching and my fellow panelists. Thank you so much, Bilkis, for that nice introduction and chairing this session. And the best of my compliments to Liz, Alex, Helena, and the entire TJN team for organizing this fantastic conference. So I'll go straight into my presentation now. It's quite raw and under construction, so you may not agree with my views, but I do look forward to your feedback and, to try and figure out what sort of devil is in the details that we should kind of, look out for. So my presentation is quite focused and based on a case study that I looked into while in Nairobi late last year. Okay, so the concept of tax justice, it emerges out of state tax extraction commingled with redistribution, yeah? It requires that all citizens, regardless of their gender, benefit to some extent from redistribution, but this is always not the case where we have structural inequalities, that have been put in place by state actors whose thinking has been framed through, historic patriarchy. And this means that in the long run, women have faced economic and financial discrimination at multiple fronts, particularly within the formal financial sector. So the idea that payment of taxes results in redistribution meant that the men or the male who paid the tax benefited, and conversely then redistribution in terms of facilitating development needs could potentially also have a discriminatory aspect to it, right? Where women are left out in terms of their financial or economic access that could foster their development needs. So where's this? Okay, yeah. So we have fintech. a digital business model that facilitates financial access through technology, helping women maintain economic presence in the market by providing them with access to crowdsourced finance, right? So here is one way to broaden the tax and redistribution nexus from a public to a private finance perspective. It allows us to think about redesigning the social contract based on fiscal pluralism that protects women's economic rights, for example. So taxing fintech could mean more tax revenue for the government with which it can it can use it to provide for development needs. But would this be the case, noting the discrimination against women in meeting their development needs because maybe of their unpaid care worker status, working in the informal sector, perhaps not contributing to state tax, whether fintech, the taxation of fintech, in other words, could be earmarked for redistribution towards these women. It remains to be evaluated against, empirical data. And because there is no guarantee the taxation of fintech would be earmarked for women's economic improvement, it is important to explore how the concept of redistribution can be examined using zakat, right? So this is the background that informs the paper that I wrote for particularly for this conference. I wanted to understand the idea of tax justice as part of fintech, but to explore it from the perspective of the Islamic wealth tax, which in Arabic we refer to as zakat, an annual tax that is paid by Muslims on their wealth. So, can the notion of tax and redistribution be advanced by broadening the conventional understanding of tax that we have to drawing in the Islamic wealth tax, which is subject to a different legal, a different fiscal, and a different social system, which is purposely paid out for socio-economic improvement, right? So here is where I want to introduce the idea of uh, autopedic legal systems, right? These are norm-setting social systems that exist alongside a state's legal and fiscal system, which also contributes to social extraction. In other words, I simply mean that there are local communities that exist in every country, for example, the Muslim community, who have the means to mobilize revenue that is targeted towards development needs, right? It's the idea of fiscal pluralism that exists in a state with multiple social systems that are capable of producing coercive norms to extract revenue from communities. So this is a sort of a different insight into tax out of a different legal system, which I think is important to start exploring if the Islamic scholarship is to have any sort of contribution towards redistribution and helping women bridge the inequality gap and also help meet the sustainable development goals in the long run. So it's not just about state tax that contributes to development needs, right? It's important to conceptualize redistribution from a private finance perspective, not just a public finance discipline, the domain of taxation, because this provides additional insight into the multiple forms of social extraction that exist in any community, in any state, other than state taxation. So um, the the uh, the Islamic wealth tax is one such form that facilitates tax justice. And this, in my view, can be studied in light of a faith-based organization that is based in Kenya. So the use of fintech by Zakat Kenya, this is the FBO that I looked into in Kenya, it aids in readjusting economic power between men and women and helps to combat gender inequality in terms of access to funds, right? It uses the M-Pesa platform to reach out to women to provide them with cash. So the role of this particular FBO can be seen as setting up private finance as an alternative discipline to redistribution other than public finance in itself. Okay, so it helps to in tandem with the state, it helps to co-produce development needs, which are met not only by the state, but are also facilitated by the private sector. There's more of this in the paper, and because I'm short of time, I really can't go into a lot of detail. However, I think the case of Mama Riziki can provide some sort of nice insights into the claims that I'm trying to make here. So here is a case of a 36-year-old woman with no formal education. She's supporting 4 children with a husband who works in the informal sector. She earns about $2 a day as a domestic help working in people's homes. So she approached the FBO in Kenya for zakat, the Islamic Wealth Tax, but the FPO takes a strategic approach to supporting women before they give them the funds, right? Their aim is to improve their economic welfare. So in providing Mama Riziki with the Islamic Wealth Tax, the FPO first helped to assess how her economic well-being could be improved. So what they did is that they did a sort of a skills assessment, and that skills assessment revealed that helping her start a food business would be sustainable for her future, and it would help push her into becoming economically, into her economic well-being, in other words, right? So the Islamic Wealth Tax was used to support this particular food business. And within the first month as a food vendor, Mama Riziki was basically earning between $8 to $15 per day compared to working as a domestic worker, where she would earn only $2 a day. So here is a fintech facilitated FPO providing private finance for development. So what can we conclude out of this small talk that I've given you? In earning her income, Mama Riziki contributed to the development of the Kenyan economy. The transaction costs she paid to transact using her M-Pesa account, I apologize for the noise, using her M-Pesa account forms part of the pool of sources of revenue available to the government. So this in turn empowered her to seek accountability from the state and to hold the government responsible for the provision of social services. So in other words, and I conclude now, fintech being a convenient model for social extraction, connecting wealthy citizens with the poor to help them seek out income streams provides some insight into the nexus between tax and redistribution as understood in the Islamic sense, and also as understood from the discipline of private finance, not just public finance. Thank you, Bilkis. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Leila. And I am so, I mean, such thought provoking. I have never heard this nexus between zakat and the tax systems that we have in South Asia. And the case study you presented is such an empowering example. I hope, later in Q&A, people, participants also get involved in asking various questions, and then we are able to look at it in more detail and also be able to read your paper. Thank you so much, Leila.
Must oblige. Shukran.
Shukran. Our next speaker is Jason Ward, who he's based in Sydney, Australia, and is Sectar's principal analyst. He has been a frequent spokesperson for the Tax Justice Network Australia over many years, and is currently a visiting fellow at the Faculty of Business at the University of Greenwich. Prior to Sectar, Mr. Ward's research and campaigning supported an Australian $16 billion increase in government revenue from Australia's offshore gas sector, including Chevron and Exxon. Jason has an MPhil in development studies from IDS at the University of Sussex. He has lived in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, campaigned against the World Bank and IMF policies, and has 15 years of experience working for two of the most active US unions. Because of huge time difference, Jason, as I shared with you previously, has pre-recorded his reflections, which will be telecast here. His colleague, Toby Quantrill, has offered to be here, and respond to any questions from the participants. Toby is the operations coordinator at Sector, working closely with Jason. He has also worked on tax justice policy with both ActionAid and ChristianAid, and was joint chair of the Independent Commission for Reform of International Corporate Taxation for several years. He is also on the board of Tax Justice UK. I will now request our technical experts supporting this, and my thank you to the tech experts to run. Please go ahead, Jason.
Greetings. My name is Jason Ward, and honored to be participating in the Tax Justice Network annual conference this year. I've been an active member in the Tax Justice Network in Australia for at least 7 years, and currently I'm the principal analyst with CICTAR, the Center for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research. I'm going to try to explain to you what it is that CICTAR does, how we use detailed forensic analysis of corporate tax avoidance to further broader efforts for both tax justice and union rights, workers' rights, and other social justice issues, and how they intersect with the tax justice issue. Firstly, I'm going to give you just a quick explanation of CICTAR, and then focus on an example of work that we have done and continue to do in the care sector. But CICTAR is basically was set up on the back of previous work that tax campaign work that had been done with a number of unions. I think the best example is with major oil companies, Chevron and Exxon. With the case of Chevron, there was a dispute where the company basically tried to sue the union and put them into bankruptcy. It was a $20 million lawsuit. And the tax campaigning that we did on Chevron basically ended up bringing in $16 billion in additional revenue from Chevron, Exxon, and other major companies, oil companies. So that created an opportunity to continue to do work on tax campaigns with unions in Australia, and now we're doing that work globally based on some of the models that we've created. So I'm gonna dive. So CICTAR basically, I mean, we do detailed tax analysis to help unions win in other campaigns, as the example I gave. We try to bring unions into the broader fight for tax justice and other social justice issues. And we do this detailed forensic analysis that fuels both of that and also provides the concrete examples of the kinds of tax reform that we need at both national and global levels. So care sector was one of the first things that CICTAR chose to do when it was set up, and we partnered with the largest union in Australia, the Nurses Union, who had been advocating for changes and adequate staffing and funding in this sector for over a decade. This is a sector which has serious gender issues because the workforce is predominantly female. Most of the residents are female as well. There's age discrimination is a key factor here. And in many places, it's predominantly migrant workers, and so there's racial discrimination, low wages, and understaffing is a key part of it. And also, this sector is a prime example of what happens when public services are turned over, outsourced, privatized, and run on a for-profit basis. So it was a perfect case study for us to look at. The work that we've done in this exposing tax avoidance and misuse of public funding for private providers, both for-profit and not-for-profit in this sector, has really changed attitudes. We haven't won everything that we've been after, but we've made some significant progress. We've changed the attitudes within the union, and we've changed public opinion, and we've definitely impacted government policy as well. So again, we still have a ways to go. One of the outcomes was making the largest for-profit company in Australia and New Zealand, Bupa, pay $157 million in taxes to the Australian Taxation Authority. That work has set us up to do care work both in the UK, in Canada, and we're beginning to embark on care sector work with unions in France and possibly New Zealand and maybe a range of other countries as well. So quickly, I'll jump to some of the work that we've done in the UK. We did one report, and we have a forthcoming one that I'm very excited about. That forthcoming one shows how one of the largest care companies in the UK basically cries poor in its financial reports in the UK. But we know that it's siphoning out huge amounts of money to pay some of the richest people in the world who have invested in this sector in order to make money and not invested in this sector to improve conditions for residents or workers. One of the reports that we've done, Darkness at Sunrise, was initially done in conjunction with the unions in Canada who own this company or own the parent company through their pension fund and are seeking to nationalize this company, which is the second largest care home company in Canada. So there's an interest of unions wanting to reform the sector in Canada, wanting to take full public ownership of a company that their pension fund owns. And we exposed that company's tax dodging in the UK through that Darkness at Sunrise report. In order to help, and again, in partnership with Unison in the UK to further reform efforts for the care sector in the UK. And again, this is a sector that desperately needs reform because of the issues that I've said before. And so we're going to continue to campaign and use tax justice as a way to achieve broader reforms in the social care sector in a number of different countries. And COVID has really heightened the need and the importance and the underlying problems in this sector. So we'll continue to fight on. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. And Toby, you can convey our appreciation to Jason Watts. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Veronica Serafini Gagan. Veronica is a feminist economist. She has a master's degree in social sciences and doctorate in economics. Her research interests include inequalities, poverty, fiscal policy, and social protection. She's an advisor on gender issues at Latindad. Veronica, the floor is yours. You have 7 minutes. Thank you. Over to you.
Yo voy a hablar, I will speak in Spanish. Voy a hablar en español. Buenos días, muchas gracias por el espacio para poder discutir estos temas tan importantes en temas de género. Latindad es una institución de la sociedad civil que trata de incidir y concientizar en temas de justicia fiscal en la región latinoamericana y a nivel global. Por eso una de nuestras preocupaciones más importantes tiene que ver con el acceso a la información y a la transparencia de los sistemas tributarios, que a nivel global y mucho más en nuestra región estamos atrasados en ese sentido y hemos avanzado mucho más en otros ámbitos de la transparencia. Sobre todo, y en el tema de género, gracias a la incidencia que han tenido los movimientos feministas, hemos avanzado mucho más y tenido logros más importantes en la política fiscal por el lado del gasto. Hemos cuestionado categorías analíticas muy importantes en las políticas fiscales y sociales, como el Producto Interno Bruto, la pobreza, ¿qué es la pobreza?, cómo entender el concepto de trabajo, tanto remunerado como no remunerado, el tiempo, la distribución del tiempo. Hemos hecho desde los movimientos feministas mucho énfasis en los últimos 20 o 30 años y se ha logrado tener información desagregada por sexo. Se ha incidido también en la evaluación de las políticas. Hoy tenemos políticas evaluaciones de eficiencia y de impacto con enfoque de género, siempre en las políticas de gasto y en las políticas sociales, sobre todo. Avanzamos en metodologías para presupuestos de gastos sensibles al género, avanzamos en el uso de las cuentas nacionales para medir el trabajo no remunerado, y para medir tenemos encuestas de uso del tiempo, ya prácticamente en todos los países de América Latina, y hay datos abiertos, y microdatos y metadatos públicos para uso de la sociedad civil y de la investigación académica. Sin embargo, la brecha, esos logros no se ven todavía en la política fiscal por el lado de los ingresos y por el lado de la política tributaria. La opacidad sigue siendo muy amplia, muy grande, muy importante en los sistemas tributarios. No tenemos datos desagregados por sexo ni datos abiertos, y eso tiene que ser un objetivo de la sociedad civil y de la academia, de incidencia en los países y en los gobiernos, en las autoridades tributarias. Así como logramos en materia de política social, necesitamos tener esos mismos logros en la política tributaria. En la política tributaria, en términos de género, avanzamos mucho en metodologías para analizar sesgos explícitos. Hay bastante escrito en la región, pero la opacidad ha impedido cuantificar los sesgos implícitos. Y tampoco hemos avanzado en la construcción de indicadores estandarizados, en salud, en educación, en empleo, en todos esos ámbitos. Tenemos indicadores estandarizados a nivel global, tenemos microdatos, podemos construir series de tiempo, podemos hacer comparaciones entre los países latinoamericanos, podemos analizar reformas sociales antes y después, qué pasó con las desigualdades de género, pero eso todavía es muy difícil analizar desde el punto de vista de la política tributaria. Todavía tenemos una distancia importante, por ejemplo, para calcular la incidencia tributaria por sexo y los efectos de las reformas impositivas en las mujeres. Si bien hemos avanzado, pero no solamente necesitamos avanzar desde la academia, sino también como sociedad civil y desde la propia universidad, en la presión a los estados para garantizar el acceso a la información. Esta opacidad no es por la falta de datos ni por la falta de instrumentos de información. Hay una opacidad que tiene un sustento político, y eso se puede argumentar mirando la cantidad de información que hay desde el lado. Si comparamos los sistemas de incentivos y comparamos los incentivos a los pobres, a la pobreza, y los incentivos al capital, a través de los incentivos tributarios. Cuando miramos el sistema de información de los subsidios a los pobres, que en América Latina no representan más que el 1% del PIB en promedio en nuestros países, por ejemplo, las transferencias monetarias en efectivo que se han implementado desde los años 90, encontramos todo tipo de listas, y esas listas tienen todo tipo de información sobre, por ejemplo, las mujeres que reciben, quiénes son, qué hacen, cuántos años tienen, cuántos hijos, sabemos dónde nacen los hijos, sabemos todo de los que reciben esa pequeña porción de los subsidios. Sin embargo, cuando analizamos el gasto tributario, resulta que desde hace pocos años tenemos cuánto representa ese gasto tributario, alrededor del 5% del PIB, pero tampoco sabemos nada. No hay evaluaciones de eficiencia, no hay evaluaciones de impacto, no podemos conocer los sesgos de género del gasto tributario, y por lo tanto no es posible cuantificar el rol redistributivo de la política tributaria, ni tampoco del gasto tributario, es decir, a quién beneficia esos tributos no recaudados. Y creo que ese tiene que ser también un un esfuerzo que tengamos que hacer, no solamente transparentar, sino también incorporar esa demanda de evaluaciones que está sobre realizada en los programas contra la pobreza, pero prácticamente nada en los incentivos tributarios al capital. Y eso no es al azar, es una decisión política, esconder los subsidios implícitos al capital y transparentar los subsidios y en este caso los de pobreza que en su mayor parte reciben las mujeres. Y por otro lado tenemos grandes desafíos de información en temas que son más nuevos. Por ejemplo, la vinculación entre los flujos financieros ilícitos y el tráfico de personas, que hoy es la tercera fuente de ingreso de la delincuencia organizada después del tráfico de drogas y armas. ¿Cómo afecta eso a las mujeres? ¿Qué participación tienen las mujeres en el tráfico de personas? Y aquí quiero agregar un tema más que tiene que ver con el panel anterior, que son los flujos financieros ilícitos y la transferencia de ganancias a través de los paraísos tributarios y su impacto en el empleo. Ahí en América Latina hay algunas miradas hacia las corporaciones y el trabajo de las mujeres. Y ahí se puede ver que además de trasladar beneficios hacia afuera, se benefician con incentivos a la inversión extranjera directa que se instala en nuestros países y en muchos casos con mano de obra feminizada, aprovechándose también de la discriminación salarial en el empleo. O sea, estas grandes corporaciones se benefician de muchas maneras. Primero, trasladando beneficios y eludiendo impuestos. Segundo, con incentivos tributarios, que restan recursos para las políticas que necesitan las mujeres y para los derechos de las mujeres. Y en tercer lugar, por la discriminación salarial, que en América Latina, en el sector industrial, está en alrededor del 20%. Eso también habría que incorporar en la agenda de investigación, estas diferencias salariales y cómo afecta a los salarios, teniendo en cuenta el sexo de quienes trabajan. Y un último tema que se visibilizó con la pandemia es el caso, se visibilizó porque un alto porcentaje de mortalidad en España fue en las residencias para personas mayores. Y eso trajo toda una discusión y algunos artículos que también vincularon esa alta mortalidad con el descuido a las residencias porque están privatizadas, porque se priorizó la eficiencia y además están privatizadas por fondos buitres que además están vinculadas a empresas en paraísos tributarios. Es decir, hay toda la política de cuidado que estamos discutiendo de la necesidad de recursos, también hay que mirarlo por el lado de la privatización del cuidado que también se da porque no recaudamos los impuestos suficientes para financiar una política pública de cuidado. O sea, hay que hilar, hoy estamos ante la necesidad de hilar muy fino, de dedicarle mucho tiempo y mucho esfuerzo a unir estos temas tributarios con las desigualdades de género. Por eso, como último punto, creo que es muy importante incorporar en la agenda, en nuestra propia agenda, estos temas de género, la necesidad de transparentar la política tributaria, de impulsar la incidencia en evaluaciones de mayor profundidad en el gasto tributario, en los incentivos tributarios, fortalecer las líneas de investigación que tienen que ver con la financiarización del cuidado y los flujos ilícitos, la privatización del cuidado, tratar de construir metodologías estandarizadas que nos permitan estudios longitudinales y transversales comparables entre los países. Y esto requiere fundamentalmente una alianza entre la academia y las organizaciones sociales, porque son temas complejos que implican líneas de investigación de mediano plazo y largo plazo que la sociedad civil no está en condiciones de enfrentar hoy con los recursos que tiene. Y porque la especialización en la investigación es también una competencia muy importante de la academia, y creo que fortalecer esos vínculos es central para la incidencia y la concientización en la ciudadanía económica. Yo estoy hablando fundamentalmente desde la mirada latinoamericana, pero creo que esto tiene que ser a nivel global. Muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad de poner estas no datos, pero sí preocupaciones para la discusión a nivel global.
Thank you, Veronica, for your excellent presentation. And it touches on so many gender equality and women's agency and their voice issues and their space for them to be at the decision-making table. And I see in all the presentations a thread of the impact of taxation on women's lives, be it care economy, be it through the reform, agenda and the, comparison of Islamic taxation and the current taxation that, was presented by Leila, and, lack of data, care economy by Jason, lack of data, lack of evaluation. And you are very right, Veronica. So many of these issues are global. I can really, really, understand the situation and can translate it in Pakistani and South Asian context. And so many of these, points that you have made in terms of, illicit financial flows, lack of transparency, etc., holds true in many, many, many countries at the global level. So thank you all presenters. I have a few questions here, but I would also like to urge participants to keep writing in their questions. The first question I have is from Toby, and this is from Declan Owens. He says, hi, Toby, great work on behalf of unions. Have you worked with any Irish unions? Over to you, Toby, for a response.
Thank you, Bilkis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. So thanks, Declan. Hello. And we haven't yet. The way that SICTAR works is we form partnerships with unions and also with civil society. It's important to say we don't just work with unions, but that's one of our key kind of areas of partnership. But we are talking to SIPTU in Ireland, and we're keen to work with them. So we hope at some point in the future we will be able to engage with them. It's one of our targets. But we have to develop those relationships over time and also understand what we can do with them, because the way SICTAR works is we only engage with partners who have their own campaigns running. So we want to strengthen existing campaigns. We don't kind of push campaigns ourselves. So we need to sort of understand what it is we would be contributing to, how that would have an impact on the ground. But yeah, so we do have an ambition to work with Irish unions. We hope to be able to do so in the future, but we also have a capacity issue of, only do so much at any given time.
Toby, stay online. There's another question for you from Chinai Mokumba. And he asked, how were you able to measure that you changed public opinion?
Well, this is always one of those big questions where Jason in his presentations makes a big statement about changing public opinion, and then somebody asks me to give us the actual data that shows that. However, let me try and answer that. And hi, Chinai, thank you for your question. I think there's a couple of ways I would respond. I mean, first of all, primarily where we would make that claim is in Australia, where SICTA has been active for the longest and has been working the most intensely for the longest period. We've only started branching out to work in other countries in the last year or two. So that claim would probably be most relevant to Australia. I would say, first of all, we see that the media are picking up the stories that we provide and that others provide. So we've seen an increasing media interest in the type of stories that we are pulling up and pushing out. So I think that's a good indicator of the fact that there is an interest in this, that the media understand that. I think perhaps more importantly, and I think this is critical, is that how political parties are reacting both to what we're saying and more broadly to the kind of questions that we're raising in terms of tax justice, because we could do all the polling and all the work we want to try and understand public opinion. Ultimately, the political parties have a much stronger mechanism for doing that. So when we see, as we have done in Australia, political parties taking this agenda on, making it part of their agenda, as we've seen in the UK, not so much from SICTA, but from the other elements of the tax justice movement and their success in the UK, we've seen these issues become central to political parties' agendas, to their manifestos. And I think that's a very good indicator that they understand this is now high in the public, in the interest of the public opinion. The third thing I would say is that union members, for instance, when we work with the union members are themselves members of the public. And one of the things we do as SICTA is we try and link the kind of personal experience, the micro, if you want. And I think this is incredibly important with regard to the experience of women and the gender issue in the case of care. And Veronica also brought this up. In the care sector, you have a lot of the workers are women, and they're also, so there's a strong gender element to the exploitation that takes place in that sector, as with, a lot of them are migrants and ethnic minorities. And again, what we're looking at is a financialization process that leads to a profit, everything being driven by profit, and therefore greater exploitation of the most exploitable, I would say. And I think we see that. And by working with these people in an organized way, within organized labor organizations, giving them the information that helps them understand how these issues affect directly the things that they're concerned about, in this case, staffing, working conditions, their ability to provide the service that they came in often want to provide, but are unable to do so because of the way in which they're forced to work. So if we can help them do that and understand how the fact that these companies that own the places they work in are taking money offshore, how that money is those profits are being funneled out and for what reason, and give them simple ways of understanding that and explain, that and support their campaigns, then I think that is a strong indicator that we've began to, we've changed public opinion. Because as I say, if organized labor starts campaigning in these areas and bringing these areas into their campaigns, then I think we've succeeded in some respects in changing public opinion. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Toby, for a really enlightening response to these questions. There's another question from Leila. Leila, could you speak a little bit more about, the nexus between the tax system, the traditional or the current tax system, and how do you see it either complementing or, both tax systems coming together, or having one Islamic system which includes elements of the current tax system? Over to you, Leila.
Thank you, Bilkis, very much. That's a very difficult question. And it's something that I'm also trying to, deconstruct in my PhD thesis as we speak. So this is how I'm going to try and answer it, right? So there's this nexus between tax and redistribution. And the perspective that I'm bringing in by looking at the Islamic fiscal system is to advance a sort of to broaden the conventional understanding of tax, as we understand it from our fiscal systems, which are, if we take the African example, Sub-Saharan Africa, the decolonial model that was provided to us was out of a British colonization. So that's the tax model that we're working with. And this specific tax model does not recognize other forms of taxes except those taxes that have been legislated for by the government. So by this sort of an example, Islamic taxation, the Islamic Wealth Tax, in other words, zakat, cannot and does not feature as part of a state's fiscal system. So when we speak about redistribution, we're looking at redistribution specifically from a public finance perspective, which excludes religious sorts of funds, right? So the question that arises is, Kenya is a constitutional legal system. And as a constitutional legal system, it does not recognize religious law, Islamic law, as part of the norms that establish its tax system. But you see, every post-colonial state approaches its fiscal history in the context of the tax rules set out by the imperial power. And this approach has not been challenged. It's not been challenged only because those tax rules have gained international recognition as state practice in generating legal revenue through taxing income and profits. And state formation following decolonization adopted the imperial tax rules, which I just explained. And these were not reflective of the indigenous, right, practices in mobilizing sources of revenue. And the presence of Muslims in Kenya since the 7th century means that their contribution towards household economic improvement through the Islamic wealth tax should be considered as part of the cognate forms of redistribution, as part of what I called an autopedic system, which has historically been present as part of Kenya's indigenous social system. So, you know, these sorts of analyses are very rare. And it's only because tax is construed as bureaucratic and as a right of the state preserved under this, you know, social contract. And the social contract in itself, which is Western in its conceptualization, omits religious funds to form part of the taxing state. So I think Kenya has the opportunity to pick up on the practice of zakat as a source of domestic revenue, to try and place zakat as part of its tax base. But because of the law and religion divide, right, this consideration has not to date been explored, at least by the Kenyan government since independence, and therefore zakat remains excluded as part of public finance. And such exclusion strips it of its construction as tax, and therefore it cannot form part of the tax system of a constitutional state such as Kenya. But if we try and debate and dialogue that fiscal pluralism, similar to legal pluralism, which allows for different forms of laws and norms in a country, can contribute to the development agenda, then we can open up space to try and speak of zakat as part of a constitutional state that is not an Islamic state. So yeah, Bilkis, that's my thinking. Thank you.
Great, great. And you know, it's important to look for solutions and I'm so glad that you're working on that and look forward to reading your, research when it's finished. It would be really very, very useful for all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Veronica, I would like to come to you with another question where, you have talked about care economy and also illicit financial flows and non-transparency. How do you think this situation can be improved? I mean, people are trying all over the world to do something or the other about it. But between, global South and global North, priorities, fiscal priorities, it seems to be difficult. So maybe you can share with us your thoughts on that.
Sí, yo creo que deberíamos tener dos prioridades. Una, fortalecer la investigación y la generación de conocimiento, porque los datos son los que permiten discutir después con los gobiernos y con nuestras propias comunidades. Y ahí viene la segunda prioridad. Creo que estos temas tienen que también ser trabajados o comprendidos por la sociedad civil que no necesariamente está vinculada a los temas de justicia tributaria, como los movimientos de mujeres, los sindicatos que ya están entrando en los temas, pero no siempre, con los partidos políticos, porque estos son temas que en nuestros países, por lo menos en América Latina, no están en la discusión cotidiana. Y es una responsabilidad nuestra, que tenemos información y que conocemos un poco más, tratar de llegar a esos ámbitos para los que los temas son desconocidos. Y creo que ese es un esfuerzo que estamos haciendo, por lo menos desde la Tindad, tratar de llegar a las organizaciones de mujeres de la sociedad civil y también, por ejemplo, a las organizaciones campesinas. Creo que ese es un desafío porque no hay cambio, no hay ninguna revolución posible en estos casos si no viene de abajo para arriba. Si la gente no se empodera con los temas, no entiende estos temas y no demanda cambios en las normas, porque eso es lo que va a permitir que también nuestros propios gobiernos tengan esas demandas a nivel internacional, en los espacios globales.
Thank you again. We have about 7 minutes left. So over to Toby for a last intervention, if you would like to add something else. So yeah, we can give you 2 minutes, Toby.
Thank you, because I mean, it's been fascinating, and thank you, Veronica. I just wanted to pick up on that last point, actually, that one of the battles that I think that tax justice has always struggled with is it's seen as this technical expertise required to understand the issues, and bringing in groups and stakeholders that have a very real stake in the issues, and especially kind of whether that's gender, whether that's other forms of concern, linking those concerns to that of tax justice is always a little challenging, and bringing those groups in and understanding how it affects them. And I think that's, so one of the things I would say, one of the ways that SICTAR works, and I think I've kind of found very powerful, is to help those groups win their battles in their immediate battles, to find a battle they're fighting. So in this case, working with the nurses unions or the care workers unions, unions representing where they have an organization where they're fighting against this corporation, and bringing in the expertise that we have to help them win that specific battle, that battle that matters to them and improve their working lives. You then engage a new audience for your bigger messages about the need for bigger reform, because they understand how those bigger reforms reflect on their everyday lives and the battles that they're fighting at a very personal level a lot of the time. And I think that's really important. So that's kind of my final thinking is I think as a movement, we have to think more about that, about connecting those personal battles to the big global battles that we're fighting.
Great, thanks. Over to Leila. Leila, you have 2 minutes for your final, reflections, anything you would like to share with the audience.
Thanks again, Bilquis. I think just as a parting shot, I'd like to say that an expansive definition of tax can potentially, permit including as part of redistribution other forms of normative orders like, religious law or the Islamic Wealth Tax. And I really think that the Kenyan society surely is filled up with a multiplicity of normative orders that justify revenue extraction. And I really think that this should be explored as part of achieving tax justice through the concept of redistribution going forward, and in terms of contributing to a wider scholarship which takes cognizant of societal approaches to contributing towards development. So I think if anyone is interested in reading the paper that I wrote for this concept for this conference, where I explain how two independent fiscal systems, state tax law and Islamic law and zakat can engage their norms to achieve redistributive justice. It would be nice to receive feedback on whether this is a good sort of a perspective to explore, whether it has the potential to try and help states expand and broaden their domestic resource mobilization policies, and what it truly means for, you know, a nice sort of a new fiscal contract between the communities, societies, and the state in itself. So that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Veronica, for any parting, you know, sharing of thoughts.
No, solo agradecer de nuevo poder contribuir y sobre todo tratar de vincular que estos espacios sean espacios en que la universidad y la academia pueda tomar estos temas y profundizarlos en la investigación de manera a tener una relación fructífera, sinérgica entre las demandas que hacemos en las organizaciones sociales y la investigación. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. I've been really, really honored and privileged to be in this session. And I would like to thank, you know, TNJ, Abad, and others who have organized this conference. And really, thank you to all the support backstage, because they are the ones who make it happen, our technical support. It has been a really very enlightening, you know, experience for me. And last point, Leila, I see your hands up.
Oh no, sorry, that was an emoji for clapping for everyone.
Okay, sorry about that. So really, thank you everyone. And I take a lot of learning back with me because there's a session after this one. If you would like to stay for that, please, you know, stay here in the room. The next session is transitioning to a care economy, caring economy or care economy. So please stay with us if you would like to do that. For the moment, I say thank you, everyone, participants, audience, and our really distinguished speakers who have made me learn a lot today. Thank you. Bye-bye.